What's up, guys? Welcome to the very first episode of the Right on Korea podcast. I am your host, Fooch. If this is the first time you're seeing or hearing me, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. However, if you recognize my face or my voice because you've been a loving subscriber, then I would like to spend a couple of minutes to fill you in on why it's Right on Korea and not Fooch TV, and what this whole deal with the podcast is. So if you're watching on YouTube and you want to skip all this riffraff, you want to know what I'm talking about with the Filipino nannies, then you just jump to the chapter below. And if you're on Spotify listening because I'm able to figure out how to upload that, then you're just going to have to skip ahead or, bear with me. So Right on Korea. As you know, the channel used to be Fooch TV, and I created videos mostly talking about social issues and big events happening in Korea. And I really enjoyed doing that, except a lot of the bigger projects such as the Nth Room or the Dark Side of K-pop or, drugs in Korea, which I know I should stop promising you guys that video is going to be coming out. However, it will come out one day, I promise. These projects took a lot of time because I'd have to do all the research. There's no information in English, or very little information in English, so I would have to search the Korean version of Wikipedia, not Korean Wikipedia, but something called Namu Wiki, which is, believe it or not, worse and more convoluted than Wikipedia, and then having to go through all the original articles to confirm information. And there was so much conflicting information, and by the time I got all that done, filming, editing, blah blah blah, whatever. So even though I enjoyed doing it, I got really burned out with the channel, on top of a lot of work was picking up. Originally I started this channel back in 2020 during COVID because I lost all of my jobs and had a lot of free time. So in 2021, especially 2022, work was really returning. I got a dog at the end of 2021. So I was just quite busy and was kind of burned out. However, I was still living in Korea and still do live in Korea, and followed the news and continue to follow the news. And every once in a while, there'd be a story where I'm like, oh, I really want to talk about this. So back in 2022, there was the Itaewon Halloween incident, which actually next week or in 10 days is the 2-year anniversary. So I will be making a video talking about that incident and my thoughts on it, and what I feel, besides what's being reported, is what happened and whose fault is what, kind of like culturally what was going on there, and what, caused it. I wanted to talk about that. Last year, the Boy Scout Jamboree in debacle. I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about the Busan World Expo. I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. First of all, no one even cares about the World Expo. Do you even know what is the World Expo is showing off? I mean, originally it was to show off new inventions, maybe like the car or airplane. But nowadays, all industries have their own, and companies have their own separate events showing off their top stuff. And the 2025 World Expo is going to be in Japan, which is next year. And the World Expo, I would imagine, would like moving around to different continents each time. So why would, after having the World Expo in 2025 in Japan, why would the next World Expo be a 2-hour plane ride in Korea? It just didn't really make any sense. And lastly, they're going against Saudi Arabia. I mean, you can't beat that Arab oil money. Assuming that the World Expo committee was ethical, they would probably win it, considering all the stuff that's going to Saudi Arabia. But I would imagine that Saudi Arabia also bribed the committee members to have the next World Expo there. So spending so much money that the city probably doesn't have to try to promote hosting the 2030 World Expo just seems so ridiculous and silly to me. I mean, and people were legitimately surprised when Busan lost. Okay, I don't know why that thumbs up happened there if you're watching, and I apologize also if you're listening. My dog's licking himself under the table, so hopefully that's not coming through. This is the first episode of the podcast, so there will be, it's going to be a little bit rough around the edges, if you know what I mean. And then the thing that really bothered me and wanted me to get back into creating content was the birth rate. As everyone knows, even if you don't know anything about South Korea has one of the lowest birth rates in the entire world. And now you have every reporter and every YouTuber making videos parroting the basic information about why the birth rate is so low, spreading this information which just isn't really accurate or is missing so much nuance that people who have no idea about what's actually happening in Korea, they're just not informed at all about the situation. So what I mean by that, a lot of the news being parroted is, the birth rate is so low because Korea has one of the highest costs of education in the entire world, or there's a lack of affordable housing in Korea, or Korea has the largest gender wage gap of the OECD countries, or all of the domestic work falls on to the mother, so women don't want to get married and have children. All of this information is either false or it lacks the important nuance to truly understand what is going on. So let's take a look at the first one. The cost of education. So if you didn't know anything about Korea and you heard that one of the reasons why the birth rate is low is because of the cost of education, what comes to your mind? I'm American, so let's take from an American perspective. The first thing an American might think is, wow, the university cost tuition must be really expensive, much more expensive than the US, which is already one of the most expensive places to go to university in the entire world. And my answer to you would be, no, actually, Korea's university is quite cheap. For the cost of 1 year of university in the US, you can do all 4 years of university in Korea. And then you might think, okay, well, it's not university. Oh, maybe it's private schooling. The public school systems are not good, and therefore parents must send their child to a private school in order to get a good education. And to that, I would say, no, you really shouldn't think about the public and private school system in Korea as what it is in the US. Actually, although there are private schools in Korea, they're not very popular, and the top quality education actually comes from the public schools, especially public schools in the wealthier areas. So unlike the US, where rich parents send their children to private school, in Korea, rich parents mostly send their children to public school. So the cost of university is a fraction of what it costs in the US. Rich parents are sending their children to public school in Korea, which is free all the way up until the end of high school. So when you say the cost of education is expensive, what exactly are we talking about? From a Westerner's perspective, it doesn't make any sense. And that requires some cultural understanding. In the US, the underdog story is beloved. So if there was somebody that was going to school, but then they dropped out of high school because they got their girlfriend pregnant, or they got pregnant themselves, or they got addicted to drugs, or a family member died and they had to start working, or maybe they were just lazy and they wanted to play video games, whatever. They dropped out of school and then some period of time happens where they didn't study anymore, or maybe they were homeless. But at some point in time, they decided to get their life back together. They studied, they got their GED, they went to university, they graduated, and now they're making good money. They started a business. This kind of story would be applauded. Like, oh yeah, you went from being homeless to being rich. This is the American dream. This is amazing. You are great. And that kind of story would be celebrated much more in the US compared to someone that just studied well in high school, then got a good job, whatever. Korea is not exactly like that. In Korean culture, they really like pedigree and perfection. Now, if you come from a poor family and you studied very hard and did well on the college entrance exam and got into a good university, that might be, oh yeah, he was poor, but he studied very hard. That might be celebrated. But ultimately, the most important thing is this college entrance exam. In the US, there's community college, so you can drop out of high school, go to community college, transfer to a university, which is much easier than getting into that university right out of high school and still get the same degree and still get a decent job. And again, if you had a story about how you didn't study well and then you got your life together, employers and universities might actually like that more than someone who just studied well in high school. Korea, although it does have community colleges, it's not really the same concept. And even if you did go to a community college, you would have to also take a very, very difficult test to get into the university. And I'm pretty sure there might even be a mark. Like the degree you get from university might kind of include the fact that you went to a community college first. So the most important thing ultimately is to do well on this college entrance exam. And the college entrance exam, which is considered the Korean SAT, it's an SAT in terms of it being a standardized test, but the things being asked on the test are absolutely ridiculous. And for an example, the English section so this is a test done by, seniors in high school. The English they're getting tested on is they're being asked questions that native speakers wouldn't even be able to answer correctly, or even if they were able to answer it correctly, they wouldn't be able to answer it in the allotted time. And there are videos like Youngkook Nanja, the Korean British man, he did a video where some of his friends, they took the English portion of the college exam and they all failed because it's not practical. So they're taking a test that's not testing their knowledge on the actual subjects. They're taking a test that is testing their ability to take the test. So through this exam, you can kind of test for IQ, but it's still, honestly speaking, it's a ridiculous test. It's way too hard and it determines way too much of the child's future. It determines what university they're going to go to, which determines what company they're going to go to, which determines who they're going to marry and the neighborhood they're going to live in. And not to sound dramatic, but it kind of is a big deal. So therefore, in order for the child to do well on this test, public school by itself is not enough. So the parents have to send them to these after-school programs, tutoring centers, academies, hagwons, whatever you want to call it, in order to essentially improve their knowledge of the subject and what kind of questions are going to be, how the subject's question is going to be asked on the test and how to answer it strategically. Again, this is not teaching English to make them proficient in English in order to answer the question as a native English speaker. This is, okay, how can we read the paragraph as quickly as possible? And if the wording is like this, it's this type of question, and therefore you need to, it's really, even though it's an English question, it's very analytical. So these after-school schools, or hagwons as it's called in Korea, this is the reason why the cost of education is so expensive, and ultimately is because Korean society does not offer many second chances. You can take the test a couple of times around that age, but ultimately this will determine the rest of your life. So, and that's something that's left out a lot of these videos. So a lot of people don't fully understand or grasp the situation. So to get back on topic, seeing that annoys me because I know what's going on. I don't have a solution to the birth rate, but I kind of know better why there's a birth rate crisis. And most of the reason comes down to culture, not one specific thing. But this video is not about the birth rate. I just wanted to say that seeing this stuff has really kind of pushing me to make stuff. And the last straw, and this finally brings us to the topic of the video, this last straw was because of the Filipino Nanny pilot program that they started here in Seoul, which is related to the birth rate. So this will tie everything together. So one of the things that they noticed is that once a child was born, if there was a couple where both parents had to work, the most ideal situation is both parents are working and their parents, so the baby's grandparents, live close by. So when both parents go to work, the grandparents take care of the child for a couple of years. And then once the child is in kindergarten, the kindergarten can take care of them for the whole day and be picked up at around 6 p.m. And then you're pretty much set from that point on. But while the baby's still a baby, the most ideal situation is both parents working and then the grandparents taking care of the child. However, if that option is not a possibility, then the second option would be to hire a nanny and to have the nanny help the mom during the maternity leave. And then once the mom goes back to work, then the nanny will continue taking care of the child until kindergarten. And then the schools can take care of the child. And the option after that, if you can't afford a nanny, is that the mother will quit her job. And we're not going to get into why I think that the mother should be quitting her job as opposed to the dad. I don't want to be called a misogynist, even though it's not misogyny. I don't want to be called names on the very first episode of the podcast. So yeah, the mom quits her job and takes care of the child. That's the third best option. So, and of course, people didn't want to give up their careers. And I don't want to go into a whole rant about not wanting to have a child in order to work a job that you hate in order to get a small amount of money to make a rich person richer. I love capitalism, but the idea of giving up your bloodline because you want to do a job that you hate, that you're miserable on Mondays and happy on Fridays, doesn't make any sense, but whatever. People were deciding that they didn't want to give up their jobs to take care of the children. So the government decided that it would be a good idea to make the nannies more affordable. If the nanny price was cheaper, then more parents would be able to hire nannies, meaning less people would have to quit their jobs, which would make people more willing to have children. At least that's the idea. So before going into the program, I'd like to state that there are currently two types of nannies in Korea. There are the Korean nannies, and they cost about 3 million won per month, 36 million won per year. It's much easier if the $1 equal to 1,000 won, so that'd be 36, but the exchange rate is getting worse in Korea right now. So it's $28,000 a year, whatever. You do the math or calculate it. Right now, $1 is about almost 1,400 won. It's been going up a lot this past week, unfortunately. So it cost, just for sake of ease, just think 1,000 won is $1. It would be a lot easier. So the cost of a Korean nanny is about working 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, is about 8 million won, 3 million won per month, 36 million won a year. And the second type of nanny is a Korean Chinese nanny. They're called Joseonjok, meaning coming from China, or Joseon, or the part of China where a lot of people went when the country was... A lot of people during the Joseon period left Korea, known as Joseon at that period, to work in China for economic benefits. There were more jobs there, whatnot. And they were recognized, eventually they were recognized by the Chinese government as Chinese. However, in the late 1990s, I think it was 99, the Korean government created a visa type for ethnic Koreans living abroad, saying that if your parents are Korean, first-gen Koreans, then you can come back to Korea and essentially work indefinitely. So a lot of the Chinese, once the Korean economy was doing much better, those people started coming back to Korea, and because of this visa, they were able to work. However, due to discrimination, and I'm not passing judgment on this discrimination, I'm just stating fact. Because of discrimination, the Korean Chinese, or the Joseonjok, they get paid less. So they're getting paid 2 million won per month, or 24 million won per year, for that same nanny job. So under in the current market for nannies, the floor is 2 million won, which is roughly minimum wage. Minimum wage is about 10,000 won per hour, plus or minus a little bit. But yeah, that's essentially it. So minimum wage, full-time, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week nanny is 2 million won. That's Korean Chinese. And the full-time Korean nannies are 3 million and up, just not due to some rule or regulation. This is just the market value. So the Korean government, they looked at Hong Kong and Singapore, and they saw that they had this Filipino/Southeast Asian nanny program where if you're not familiar, essentially, if you can go to Hong Kong, if you're Filipino or from whatever qualifying countries, and work as a nanny, and there are some regulations, such as the nanny has to live with the family and they have 1 day off per week. However, they get paid less than the minimum wage in Hong Kong. So a Hong Kong nanny versus a Filipino nanny, under that specific visa, the Hong Kong nanny would be legally required to get paid more, whereas the nanny under the special visa could get paid less than minimum wage. So the Korean government saw that program and something similar in Singapore as well, and they said, oh, that would be a good program to bring to Korea, because now the current cheapest price for a nanny is 2 million won, we can bring that down. And I think the cost for the full-time nannies in Hong Kong are about 1 million won, or it was like 500 to 800,000 won per month, so $500 to $800 per month, maybe up to 1,000. So the Korean government said, hey, let's do that. If we reduce the cost of nanny by at least 50%, that's huge, and maybe more people will have children. So that was the plan. However, there was a whole bunch of, outcry from the opposition party, the Democratic Party, saying, oh, this is racist, you can't do that. And I mean, honestly speaking, they're full of crap, because this is the same party that required every single foreigner who worked in a certain area that was governed by that party to get a COVID test. So if you are a foreigner who, let's say, lived in Korea for 10 years, hadn't left the country at all to go on vacation for 10 years, just by the mere fact that you're a foreigner, you are forced to get a COVID test, which is a racist policy. So the same party that required people to do that is now saying that paying people less than minimum wage would be racist, even though it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with nationality. This was just clearly political, and they wanted to attack the ruling party regardless of if they actually believed in what they were saying or not. And of course, the human rights activists claim that, oh, this is unfair, this is discrimination. You can't pay people less than minimum wage. And there is, even though Korea has some sort of agreement internationally that they wouldn't do that, it's not legally binding that they can't. And again, I like to emphasize, this is not racist. If this is based on the specific nature of the program and the visa. So if you are Filipino and you came to Korea and got married to a Korean and had a regular residency visa, you would be legally entitled to getting minimum wage, at the very least, minimum wage. So it has absolutely nothing to do with race. It would be this specific program. They would create a new type of visa, and if the person wanted to optionally sign up and come to Korea, that would be 100% their choice. And they would be getting paid less than minimum wage, but the amount of money they're getting paid is much more than what they'd be getting paid in their home country. And they'd still be able to live comfortably in Korea and send money back home. But for whatever reason, maybe it was because the opposition party was too strong, or they didn't want to upset the human rights activists, even though these human rights activists wouldn't be voting for the ruling party anyway, because they're conservatives. And I would imagine that human rights activists would be voting for the Liberal or a Democratic Party. Instead of creating a new type of visa program, they put them on an existing visa program, the E9, which is just for laborers to work temporarily in Korea. They put them on this visa, which now requires them to be getting paid minimum wage. So these Filipino nannies would be coming to Korea. Essentially what the program is the government would outsource the actual hiring of the nannies. They would outsource distributing the nannies to families using these private companies, these two apps, which focus on housekeeping. And the government would vet the nannies. They brought in 100 part of the pilot program, and the nannies would have to have a certain level of Korean, although I don't think it would be that high, or I don't think the class they have to pass is that very difficult. So they probably wouldn't be able to communicate that well with the families. And they have to have the criminal background check. And housing would be provided by the government for the nannies, as well as insurance. And these private companies would, once they connected the nannies to a family, of course, they'd be getting a cut. So what turned out to be originally a good idea, bringing nannies over, paying them less than minimum wage in order to encourage people having more children or making it more affordable to raise children, what ultimately happened was the government brought the nannies over, required that they get paid minimum wage. So they're getting paid almost exactly the same amount of money that the Chinese Korean are getting paid. They're almost getting paid the same exact amount of money, in addition to the housing, in addition to the insurance, in addition to these private companies getting a cut of the finder's fee. So what is the point of having the program? When you bring immigrants into a country, it's not because you're just a welcoming country that wants to share the country with everyone. If you're bringing immigrants into a country, it's for a specific reason. So if you brought in immigrants to do construction jobs or jobs related to the 3Ds, dirty, dangerous, and I always forget that third D, degrading, dirty, dangerous, degrading. Anyway, if you wanted to bring immigrants in to do those jobs because there aren't enough people, there aren't enough citizens that are willing to do that job. One, I would think that instead of bringing in immigrants, you would just allow the free market to determine how much these people should be getting paid. And there would be, assuming we're talking about Korea, there would be at a certain price point enough people who would be willing to do construction or clean bathrooms if they got paid enough. But that aside, let's assume that we're sticking with the immigrants. You would only want to bring in immigrant workers if there weren't enough Koreans willing to do that job. So we don't have enough Koreans willing to clean toilets. We don't have enough Koreans willing to do construction jobs, whatever. Therefore, we need to import that workforce and have them work in Korea at minimum wage because Koreans are not willing to do that type of work, minimum wage. However, in the nanny situation, the current market rate for the Korean Chinese nannies is minimum wage. And the issue was never a supply issue. It wasn't that there aren't enough nannies to do the job. It was that the cost of hiring the nannies is too expensive. And the expensive price is minimum wage. So you literally can't legally reduce the price for citizens or people with every visa type up until now. So the issue was never about the supply of workers in the market. The issue was just about even getting paid minimum wage. Hiring a nanny at full time is not cheap for a lot of families. The average income is about 36 million per year. I think that's the medium, somewhere around there. So assuming two people are working, medium income, that's less than 80 million a year, spending almost 50% of that on a nanny alone. That's why they wanted to bring in nannies that could be charged less to bring down the cost. But if you're bringing in nannies from other countries when the market already has enough supply and paying them the same amount of money, maybe a few percent less, what is the point of the entire program? And that's what nobody in Korea, I've spoken to people about this, nobody likes this. Because nobody understands what the purpose is. There's no reason to have done this. So they are not happy. And of course, and unfortunately, in Korean company fashion, promising one thing and not delivering, of the 100 Filipino nannies that came to Korea, they were supposed to get paid some amount of salary for going to the training program. However, suddenly the two platforms stated that they couldn't pay this amount at once due to financial difficulty, even though they knew from the beginning that they would have to pay this amount of money. So right off the bat, the nannies were not given what they were promised. So they ended up having to split that payment into two payments. So they're not happy, and two of them ran away, and they ran off to Busan, and despite the country being full of CCTVs, they were able to get away for a couple of days before getting caught and deported. So, within the first week of actually doing the housework, 2% of the nannies already escaped and left for, maybe because they didn't get paid as they were promised. Maybe they wanted to find work that would pay more money, even though I don't think they would because they would be there illegally, whatever. But this whole program, it just didn't make any sense. So again, we have nannies, Filipino nannies now that cost the same as Chinese Korean nannies. So there's really the slight benefit is that, yes, the Filipino nannies can speak English. So some parents hope that the nannies will be speaking in English to the child to give the child some sort of, heads up on English education, but it's really not enough to bring these people over and give them the same amount of money as the market rate when there's already enough supply by residents and citizens in the market, and then also use taxpayer money to house them and provide them insurance. So, I don't know what the hell they were thinking with this. I'm sure they had good intentions, and anytime they reached a roadblock, instead of just trying to overcome it, they say, okay, well, we'll give this concession, that concession, and then you end up with a half-baked program that doesn't set out what it set out to accomplish. Again, the goal of the program was to reduce the cost of nannies for parents, and it reduced the cost by several percent. And is that the cost that it was reduced, does that make up for, or is that even less than after you include the housing and insurance that the taxpayers have to pay? It may end up being more expensive. And this is the problem when you don't understand the root causes of things like the birth rate. Because if you look at just the surface level and you say, okay, cost of education, affordable housing, this, that, and that, then you try to make policies to solve those issues, but ultimately the policies that are made are half-baked and don't even help those issues. But ultimately, those were not the main issues to begin with. They were much deeper. And in order to solve that, people have to have long, lengthy discussions about what the true problem is. And a lot of it is cultural, which means it will be very difficult to change. And doing these stunts like this nanny program ultimately really doesn't do anything, which is personally why I don't really like when the government gets involved to solve these issues, because they don't know what they're doing. They're incompetent. They don't understand the situation. And ultimately, they create a program that wastes taxpayer dollars. And it's just nobody's happy about the situation. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today, the Filipino nanny situation. Next time we'll be talking about the 2nd year anniversary of the Itaewon Halloween incident. And after that, I want to talk about the Hybe New Jeans things. So I'm going to hit the ground running with this. There's so much stuff that I want to talk about. So much stuff that people who don't live in Korea, people that don't understand Korean culture, they're talking about. And, these news agencies, BBC and whatnot, they're just all parroting each other, trying to put their own bias and explanations to what's going on. And they don't understand what's going on, and they don't understand how people in Korea think about these situations. So I'm back, I'm motivated, I'm upset, and I'm ready to pump out content. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this first episode. I will catch you next time.